Introduction. The Fracture Point. Diagnosing the modern mind under siege. Your mind is currently programmed for fragility, reacting to every external spark like dry tinder. This isn't just an audiobook. It's a systematic demolition of your reactive ego to build a fortified mental fortress. Learn to install the neural pathways of stoic endurance and turn chaos into your greatest advantage. Your current mental framework is failing you because it was built for comfort, not combat. Every time you snap under pressure, you prove your ego is still in control. We are dismantling that fragility today. Learn to replace your reactive instincts with a fortified mental fortress through deliberate, calculated hardship. Consider this the initial diagnostic scan. You are operating with a corrupted operating system. It is a legacy build, installed not by you, but by a confluence of outdated social scripts, engineered dopamine traps, and the silent erosion of your own attention. This system defaults to reaction. It mistakes the ping of a notification for a legitimate priority. It interprets a colleague's curt email as a declaration of war. It confuses the anxiety of an unmet expectation with a genuine threat to your survival. This is the fracture point. The modern mind is under a sustained, sophisticated siege. The battlefield is not out there in some distant conflict. It is here, in the 6 inches of space behind your eyes. The weapons are not bullets, but infinite streams of context-switching demands. The objective is not your physical territory, but your cognitive sovereignty. Your capacity for deep focus, for unimpeachable judgment, for action untethered from volatile emotion, is the high ground. And you have likely ceded it, inch by inch, in exchange for trivial comforts and the illusion of connection. That ends now. What follows is not motivational theory, it is a field manual for psychological reclamation. We will not paint over the rust. We will identify the structural weaknesses, the load-bearing faults in your perception. We will audit the catastrophic energy drain of your undisciplined reactions. Then we will forge a new architecture from the ground up. This is engineering, not inspiration. It is the deliberate, often uncomfortable process of replacing a brittle, reactive framework with one of resilient, unassailable command. The goal is not to feel less. It is to be hijacked less. To install a firewall between stimulus and your strategic response. To pressure test your composure until failure is no longer a variable in the equation. This is the foundation of all high performance. Without it, you are a ship adrift, responding to every wave, every wind. With it, you become the harbor. The chaos still arrives, but it breaks against a perimeter you designed. Chapter 1. The Architecture of the Fragile Mind. Consider the last time your operational state was compromised, not by a catastrophe, but by an intrusion, a notification vibrating against a wooden surface, a calendar alert for a meeting you had mentally discarded, a critical email arriving not at 9 a.m. but at 9 p.m., its subject line a silent detonation in your personal space. In that precise nanosecond, a sequence was initiated that bypassed all your modern upgrades. A signal traveled the neural pathway from optic nerve or auditory cortex to the brain's processing center. But the destination was not the prefrontal cortex, the command module of rational thought, strategic delay, and cost-benefit analysis. It was routed instead to an older, more volatile substation, the amygdala. This rerouting is not an occasional glitch. It is the default setting. This is the architecture of fragility. Do not mistake it for a character flaw, a lack of discipline. It is a catastrophic design flaw. a system engineered over millennia for immediate threat detection on a savanna, a system optimized to recognize the silhouette of a predator in tall grass or the snap of a branch, is now hopelessly mismatched for the sustained, low-grade psychic siege of the digital age. We have architected a world of perpetual, asynchronous stimulus, a global network operating on interrupt-driven protocols, and then we wonder why our internal world is in a state of perpetual alarm, its firewalls consistently breached. Let us dissect this design with clinical precision. The fragile mind operates on a core principle of reactive immediacy. Its structural integrity is not inherent. It is contingent, borrowed. It is contingent upon external conditions remaining predictable, favorable, and aligned with its internal projections and expectations. The moment these conditions experience a phase shift, a project fails, a person criticizes with surgical accuracy, a 5-year plan unravels in 5 minutes, the architecture reveals its fundamental fault lines. Visualize a building where the primary load-bearing beam is not steel, but vapor. That beam is the ego, a construct built from 2 unstable compounds, the perception of control and the anticipation of reward. When lateral pressure is applied, this beam does not bend with graceful resilience. It cracks with a sound you feel physiologically before you comprehend it mentally. You feel this crack as a surge of cortisol flooding the system, a tectonic tightening in the chest, a rapid and violent narrowing of perceptual focus to the single glaring point of perceived threat. Your vision literally constricts, your hearing muffles. This is not you thinking, this is a legacy system, a biological kernel from a prior version of the world, executing a pre-programmed protocol for survival. It is dumping all non-essential processes to run the fight-or-flight executable. The problem is that the threat is now a quarterly report, a dismissive comment, a missed deadline. The system is responding to a social or professional variable with a physiological nuclear option. Modern digital saturation is the relentless, automated stress test this architecture was never meant to endure. It is not merely the volume of information that fatigues and weakens the ego's load-bearing beam. It is the tempo, the cadence, the constant, irregular, and unpredictable pulse of incoming data packets, each ping a potential alert, each notification a possible demand, each curated highlight from another man's life, a comparative benchmark your system feels compelled to process. This creates a condition of chronic anticipatory anxiety. Your neural perimeter is never secure. You are always, on some level, waiting for the next breach. This conditions the entire mental apparatus to operate in a state of low-grade defensive alert. Your baseline stability, what should be a calm, neutral operating frequency, a steady hum of potential, becomes a warbling, distorted signal of distracted readiness. You exist in a permanent pre-reaction state. Your resources are allocated to monitoring channels, not to mastering them. You are forever preparing to react, which means you are never truly prepared to act from a place of intentional sovereign authority. Your initiative is preempted by your own vigilance. Within this compromised over-alert structure lie specific hardwired neural triggers. They are not random. They are exploitable features wired directly into your emotional power grid. Your first tactical operation is to identify them with the dispassion of a security auditor. The trigger of interrupted progress. You achieve a state of flow, a high-bandwidth cognitive channel, and an external demand shatters it, causing a system crash and a painful reboot cycle. The trigger of perceived unfairness. a violation of your internal model of justice, whether in traffic or in a boardroom negotiation, activating a deep-seated rage circuit meant to enforce tribal norms. The trigger of involuntary social comparison, the automated, often subconscious measurement of your private, behind-the-scenes reality against someone else's public, polished facade, triggering the lack circuit. These are not mere annoyances. They are exploit vectors. Each one is a documented backdoor into your executive function, a way to bypass your rational command center. When activated, they do not simply cause a feeling, they initiate an emotional spiral, a recursive, looping subroutine of thought that consumes vast amounts of cognitive energy with zero strategic output. You are no longer solving a problem. You are rehearsing a grievance. You are debugging a scenario that already happened or simulating one that may not. The process is computationally expensive and strategically bankrupt. This reactive spiral has a tangible, quantifiable cost that you can audit at the end of any day. Every minute spent in internal negotiation with a slight, in mentally replaying a failure on a loop, in anxiously anticipating a reply you cannot control, is a direct and irreversible drain from your finite cognitive energy reserves. Frame this in physical terms. Think of your focused attention not as a muscle, but as bandwidth on a secure line. A clear, stable signal carries maximum data with minimal loss. Decisions are crisp, creativity flows, execution is clean. A reactive mind introduces noise, static of anxiety, distortion of resentment, crosstalk from emotional channels running in the background. The signal-to-noise ratio plummets. The data degrades. Your decision-making clarity drops into the realm of error. Your creative capacity diminishes to mere recombination of old ideas. Your willpower depletes fighting internal fires. You end the day intellectually exhausted, not from the productive labor of creation, but from the internal friction and entropy of managing a system in constant, low-level panic. You have not been outworked. You have been outmanaged by your own outdated code. The foundation for a total psychological overhaul, a gut renovation of the mind, begins with and depends upon this ruthless, unflinching diagnosis. You must become a cartographer of your own friction. You must map the points of maximum resistance with seismic accuracy. Where does the energy leak manifest? Is it the first hour of the day, lost not to planning but to a reactive scroll through the message queue, letting others set the initial conditions of your consciousness? Is it the simmering, low-boil irritation that persists for hours after a meeting that did not go your way, a chemical residue poisoning your subsequent tasks? Is it the palpable, almost electrical discomfort that arises when you attempt to sit in silence for 10 minutes without reaching for a device to feed the stimulus engine? These moments are not personal failures. They are system readouts. They are diagnostic logs showing you in real time where your architecture is weakest, where the load-bearing beam of the ego is thinnest. They show you where the sheer weight of external chaos is being transferred directly to your emotional core without any filtering, processing, or voltage regulation. This transfer is the critical vulnerability. It is the open port through which chaos colonizes your calm. Therefore, the initial strategic objective is not to build new strength atop a crumbling foundation. It is to cease the active daily weakening. To stop pouring cognitive capital, your most precious resource, into the futile work of shoring up a structurally flawed design. You must internalize the operational truth that the feeling of being overwhelmed, of being at the mercy of events, is not the objective truth of your circumstance. It is the output signal of a system that evolutionarily prioritizes speed of reaction over quality of response. It is the echo of an ancient alarm bell, ringing loudly in a room where the real threat is not a predator at the door, but the cumulative, systemic drain of 1,000 minor digital distractions. The chaos will still arrive, the interruptions will still come, but you now understand their point of entry. You have located the fault lines in the architecture, not as a victim, but as an engineer. The next move is not to patch the cracks with positive thinking or temporary coping mechanisms. That is maintenance on a doomed structure. The next move is to initiate a controlled demolition and redesign the foundation from the bedrock up using materials of your own conscious choosing. The blueprint for that new foundation requires a substance far more resilient than ego. It requires a principle that does not crack under pressure because it does not resist pressure at all. It accepts load and redistributes it, transforming weight into stability. That principle is perception, stripped bare. Chapter 2. The Digital Siege. How instant gratification rewires your neural perimeter. That principle is perception, stripped bare. But before you can wield it, you must understand the precise mechanism of your current defeat. You must map the digital siege that has turned your mind's natural architecture into its own prison. This is not about social media being distracting. That is a child's observation. This is a forensic analysis of how instant gratification has performed a silent, systemic takeover of your neural command centers. It has rewired your reward pathways and, in doing so, dismantled your psychological perimeter. The feeling of fragility is not a personal failing. It is the logical output of a brain that has been trained to expect a reward for every minor effort and to interpret the absence of that reward as a threat. Consider the neurological protocol. Your brain operates on a principle of predictive coding. It builds models of the world based on past inputs, and it releases neurotransmitters like dopamine not upon receiving a reward, but upon taking an action it predicts will lead to one. The pursuit is the point. The hunt triggers the chemical cascade. This system was engineered for environments of scarcity and delayed payoff, stalking prey for days, planting seeds for a harvest months away. The dopamine surge fueled the focus and endurance required for long-term survival strategies. It was the chemical engine of patience. The modern digital environment has hacked this protocol. It has created a world of infinite, immediate micro-rewards. A notification is a successful hunt. A like is a captured prey. A scroll reveals a new visual stimulus. Each one triggers a micro-dopamine release. The consequence is not mere distraction. It is a fundamental recalibration of your brain's expectation horizon. Your neural circuitry now predicts that effort and reward should be virtually simultaneous. The space between action and outcome, the space where patience, strategy and resilience are forged, has been systematically erased. When you then face a real-world challenge that operates on the old, delayed timeline, completing a complex project, mending a relationship, building physical strength, your brain rebels. It interprets the lack of immediate feedback as an error in the model, as a failure. The dopamine trough that follows is experienced neurologically as a threat state. This is the core of the reactive emotional spiral. You are not reacting to the difficulty of the task itself. You are reacting to the biochemical withdrawal from the expectation of instant gratification. Your frustration, your anxiety, your urge to quit, These are not responses to the work. They are symptoms of a neurological dependency. This dependency creates specific, exploitable triggers. The first is interruption tolerance, or the complete lack thereof. Your brain, now accustomed to a frenetic pace of novel stimuli, begins to crave interruption. It seeks the dopamine hit of context switching. The deep focus required for meaningful work becomes physiologically uncomfortable. It feels like deprivation, so you manufacture interruptions. You check an empty inbox. You refresh a barren feed. You create the very chaos you then blame for your lack of progress. The second trigger is the amplification of perceived adversity. A minor setback, a critical email, a missed deadline, a logistical hiccup is not processed as a single, solvable problem. It is processed through the lens of a brain in a perpetual, low-grade threat state. The amygdala, primed by constant digital alerts, applies the same urgency to a work conflict as it would to a physical ambush. The result is an emotional payload that is orders of magnitude larger than the event warrants. Let us be surgically precise. When your phone vibrates with a message during a crucial work session, you experience a cognitive event with a measurable energy cost. First, there is the attentional capture. Your focus is forcibly ripped from its target. Then, the context switch. Your brain must load the new context of the message, its sender, its potential meaning. Then, the assessment. Is this urgent? A threat? A reward? Then the decision to respond or ignore. Finally, the return to the original task, which requires reloading the previous context, a process that is never 100% efficient. Research quantifies this as the switch cost. It can drain as much as 40% of your productive cognitive bandwidth for the hour. Now, multiply this by the dozens of micro-interruptions you willingly accept each day. You are not managing a workflow. You are conducting a continuous triage on a self-inflicted stream of psychic shrapnel. The drain is not metaphorical, it is a thermodynamic reality. Your mental energy is a finite reservoir. Every interruption is a leak. This brings us to the foundation of the overhaul, diagnosing your internal friction points. These are not your failures, they are your vulnerabilities. Map them. The friction point is the specific moment when your planned intentional action is hijacked by a reactive impulse. It is the moment you reach for the phone when the work gets hard. It is the moment you open the news site to seek the adrenaline of outrage instead of sitting with the discomfort of a creative block. It is the moment you choose to engage an online argument, feeding the neural circuit that mistakes drama for significance. Each friction point has a trigger, a routine, and a reward. The trigger is often an internal state: boredom, uncertainty, fatigue, loneliness. The routine is the automatic digital pacifier you reach for. The reward is the temporary silencing of that uncomfortable state via a hit of novelty or validation. Your cognitive energy drain can be quantified by auditing these friction points. Track them for one day. Not with judgment, but with the cold detachment of a field analyst studying enemy patrol patterns. How many times did your hand move toward a device without a conscious command? How many times did you break focus to seek external input? How many times did you choose the simulated urgency of a notification over the real, slow urgency of your deepest objective? The number will shock you. It is the precise measure of how much of your cognitive capital you are voluntarily incinerating. This is the architecture of the fragile mind in the digital age. It is not weak, it is overclocked. It is running a million background processes for a hostile operating system it did not consent to install. The feeling of instability is the system warning you of critical overload. Therefore, the path to resilience cannot begin with adding more tasks, more discipline. More morning routines. That is like trying to launch a missile from a computer that is already frozen. You must first terminate the parasitic processes. You must regain control of your core processing power. This requires a deliberate, tactical, scorched earth policy against the mechanisms of instant gratification. It is not about deleting apps. It is about deleting the neural pathways that demand them. You must reintroduce latency into your system. You must retrain your brain to tolerate the space between effort and reward, to find the dopamine not in the ping of a notification, but in the deep, resonant silence of sustained concentration. The siege works because it offers easy answers to hard questions. It offers distraction from discomfort. It offers validation in place of self-worth. To resist it, you must learn to endure the hard questions, to sit in the discomfort. To generate your own validation from the integrity of your actions, not the applause of the crowd. The digital world is a psychological stress test you are taking every second without knowing the scoring system. You are being graded on your interruptibility, your outrage capacity, your attention span. And by those metrics, you are being perfectly conditioned to fail at everything that requires sovereignty. The fragile mind is not your fault. But its continued fragility is now your responsibility. The diagnosis is complete. The enemy's playbook is in your hands. The siege engine is not out there. It is in your pocket. It is in the very wiring of your expectation. To dismantle it, you must move from diagnosis to active counterinsurgency. You must identify not just the external triggers, but the enemy within, the reactive brain patterns that welcome the chaos. Chapter 3. Identifying the enemy within. Your brain's reactive triggers and emotional fault lines. This enemy within is not a demon. It is not a flaw. It is a protocol. A deeply embedded evolutionary operating system designed for a world of physical immediacy, now running in a context of psychological abstraction. Its primary function is to ensure survival. Its secondary function is to conserve energy, and in the modern theater, it is executing both functions with catastrophic precision, turning you into a reactive asset instead of a strategic commander. Your brain's predictive coding protocol, the ancient targeting system, has been hijacked. It was built to scan a savanna for silhouette and movement, to prioritize the crack of a branch over the song of a bird. Its success metric was binary: identify threat, initiate response, live. This system operates on a currency of certainty. It craves clean, resolvable patterns. A predator appears, you fight, flee, or freeze. The loop closes. Energy is spent, then replenished in the calm. Now, deploy that same system into the digital information sphere. The threats are no longer lions. They are implications. They are comment sections. They are market fluctuations, ambiguous social cues, the perpetual low-grade hum of potential crisis in a news feed. The predator's silhouette is replaced by a notifications glow. The crack of the branch is the ping of a message that might contain criticism or opportunity, or nothing at all. The system fires anyway. It must. Its design dictates it. It attempts to run its ancient threat resolution software on problems that have no physical coordinates, no finality. This is the genesis of your reactive triggers. They are not emotional mysteries. They are logical errors in a legacy system. When your superior sends an email with a terse tone, the protocol receives insufficient data. It cannot measure his facial expression, his body language. The ambiguity registers as a potential threat, a social threat, a threat to status or security. The amygdala, the brain's alarm siren, receives the flag. It does not care that the threat is symbolic. It initiates the cascade. Cortisol, adrenaline, increased heart rate, redirected blood flow. You are now in a biochemical state of readiness for a fight that does not exist, over words on a screen. This is not an overreaction. It is a correct reaction to incorrect data. The system is working perfectly. It is you who have placed it in an impossible environment. Your emotional fault lines are the cracks in this strained architecture. They form where the protocol's demand for certainty collides with the modern world's deliberate ambiguity. Consider the trigger of unexpected change. Your protocol runs on a model of the world. It creates a map of expectations to conserve cognitive energy. When reality deviates from the map, a project cancellation, a sudden travel demand, a broken appliance, the system interprets the deviation as a map error, and a map error in a hostile environment is a prelude to death. The biochemical surge you feel is not anger at the change itself. It is your internal security apparatus screaming that your navigation systems are offline. You are, in that moment, cognitively lost, or examine the trigger of perceived injustice. This is a direct tap into the protocol's coalitional wiring. We evolved in tribes. Fairness in resource distribution was a matter of survival. To be shorted was to be weakened. To see a rival rewarded unfairly was to see the tribe's integrity compromised. Now, you witness a colleague receive credit for your work. The protocol receives this data and categorizes it as a direct threat to your standing within the tribe, which it equates with survival. The rage or bitterness that follows is not petty. It is a survival algorithm flagging a critical breach in the social contract. It is preparing you for conflict to restore balance, but the tribe is a corporation of thousands. The conflict is a political game with unwritten rules. The algorithm has no solution for this, so it loops, it drains. The most insidious trigger is the void of feedback, the unanswered text, the deferred decision, the silent aftermath of a proposal. For the predictive brain, silence is the most terrifying data set of all. It is the ultimate ambiguity. The protocol, desperate to close the loop, begins to generate its own data. It runs simulations. It imagines scenarios. Each simulation is treated as a potential reality, each one triggering a microdose of the threat response. You are not worrying about a thing. You are being attacked repeatedly by your own brain's attempt to resolve an equation with too many variables. This is the cognitive energy drain quantified. It is not the problem itself that exhausts you. It is the 10,000 phantom problems your protocol generates in its desperate attempt to solve the one. This internal enemy has a command structure. Its generals are your core narratives, the unconscious, simplifying stories your protocol has written to explain the world. I must be in control to be safe. My worth is tied to my productivity. If I am not liked, I will be excluded. These are not truths. They are heuristic shortcuts, forged in past experiences and adopted by the protocol as permanent law. When an event clashes with a core narrative, the entire system goes to high alert. A minor professional setback does not just mean a task failed. It means the narrative, "My worth is tied to my productivity," has been violated. The protocol now interprets the setback as an existential threat to your identity. The emotional response is therefore existential in scale. To identify the enemy is to conduct a forensic audit of your own collapse. Do not look for the emotion. Look for the protocol error that preceded it. The next time you feel the surge, the heat of anger, the cold clamp of anxiety, the hollow pull of resentment, halt. Do not judge the feeling. Reverse engineer the trigger. Ask with the cold detachment of a systems analyst, what piece of ambiguous data was just fed into my predictive coding system? What core narrative did it clash with? What ancient survival circuit is currently misinterpreting a symbolic threat as a physical one? The transition from diagnosis to active counterinsurgency begins here, in this micro-pause. You are not stopping your emotion. You are identifying the faulty logic that authorized its release. You are discovering that the chaos you feel is not a response to the world, but to your own brain's outdated yet impeccably logical interpretation of it. The enemy within is a loyal soldier. It is following orders written in the genetic code of a vanished world. Your first act of command is not to destroy this soldier. It is to recognize its valor, its dedication, and then, with absolute authority, relieve it of its duty. You must promote yourself from the entity being protected to the entity issuing the protocols. The siege is internal. The firewall must be built not against the world, but between your conscious command center and the legacy system running in the background. This is the application. Tonight, when you are alone with your devices, you will not consume. You will observe. You will open your email, your social feed, your messaging app, not to engage, but to audit. Watch. Feel. Note the precise moment your breathing shallows. Identify the specific trigger, the subject line, the image, the name of the sender that caused the protocol to flag a threat. Do not act. Simply log the incident. You are no longer a user of these systems. You are a scout, mapping the enemy's infiltration routes into your own nervous system. This is not meditation. This is reconnaissance. The goal is not calm. The goal is intelligence. Before you can build an unbreakable protocol, you must first have a complete, unflinching schematic of the fragile one currently running the show. The architecture of your mind is about to be renovated. This is the initial survey of the fault lines. Chapter 4. The Cost of Instability. Quantifying your daily cognitive energy drain. The initial survey is complete. You have logged the incidents. You have mapped the fault lines where external chaos triggers internal tremors. You now possess raw intelligence on the enemy's infiltration routes. This data is not for contemplation. It is for quantification. Every trigger you identified, every shallow breath you noted, every spike of irrational urgency you felt. These are not mere psychological events. They are energy transactions. Each one represents a measurable drain on your most critical strategic resource, your cognitive bandwidth. Before we can construct a new architecture, we must first calculate the exact toll the old one extracts. We must move from reconnaissance to forensic accounting. This chapter is an audit of your mental economy. We are going to quantify the cost of instability down to the last psychological calorie. Consider your mind not as a soul, not as a spirit, but as a command center. It has a finite power grid. Every decision, every moment of focus, every instance of emotional regulation draws from this grid. In a state of stability, this power is allocated deliberately to deep work, to strategic planning, to meaningful engagement. But in a state of fragility, the state you have just mapped. The grid is under constant parasitic load. The alarms from your outdated threat detection protocol are not free. The mental gymnastics required to suppress a reactive spiral are not free. The background anxiety of an unchecked digital feed is not free. They are continuous, silent drains on the system. You are operating with massive inefficiency. You are running a mental economy with a staggering deficit. Let us define the currency: cognitive energy units. 1 CEU represents the irreducible quantum of mental effort required to execute a single, deliberate executive function, to choose a focused response over a reactive one, to sustain attention on a difficult task for 1 hour, to calmly reassess a plan after a setback. Your daily allotment of CEUs is fixed by biology. It is your psychological operating budget. Now, itemize your daily expenditures. The first and largest line item, the vigilance tax. This is the constant background drain of maintaining your neural perimeter in a state of high alert against perceived digital and social threats. Every notification you anticipate, every status comparison you subconsciously perform, every moment you spend mentally rehearsing defensive arguments, this is the vigilance tax. It consumes CEUs by the thousands before your day has even truly begun. The second major expenditure, the reaction surcharge. This is the catastrophic draw on power that occurs when a trigger, identified in your reconnaissance, successfully breaches your perimeter. The system detects a threat. The outdated protocol initiates a full biochemical cascade. Your focus shatters. Your emotional equilibrium destabilizes. Now, a massive portion of your remaining CEUs must be urgently diverted to damage control, to suppressing the outward display of anger or panic, to ruminating on the perceived slight or failure, to performing the internal public relations campaign that rationalizes the reaction. This surcharge is exponential. A minor trigger can bankrupt your cognitive energy for an entire afternoon, leaving nothing for your actual priorities. We move to the third drain, the decision debt. A fragile mind, its bandwidth already choked by the vigilance tax and sporadic reaction surcharges, defaults to cognitive shortcuts. It makes poor decisions. It chooses the path of least resistance every single time. The fast food over the meal that requires preparation. The distracting entertainment over the focused study. The avoidance of a difficult conversation. These are not merely bad choices. They are loans taken out against your future self. Each one incurs interest. The poor nutritional choice drains physical energy later, requiring more CEUs to overcome fatigue. The avoided conversation metastasizes into a larger conflict, demanding a future reaction surcharge 10 times the original cost. The neglected study creates a skill gap that will trigger future anxiety. This is compound interest on poor psychological governance. The final, most insidious line item, the opportunity cost. This is not a direct drain, but a colossal negation of potential. Every CEU spent on managing instability is a CEU stolen from creation, from advancement, from mastery. While you are paying the vigilance tax, another man is analyzing market trends. While you are servicing a reaction surcharge, another man is refining his craft. While you are buried under decision debt, another man is making capital allocations that will compound for decades. Your fragile architecture turns you into a maintenance engineer for a crumbling building, forever patching leaks, while the architects and builders are erecting monuments next door. You are not just spending your cognitive energy, you are forfeiting your sovereignty over time itself. The arithmetic is merciless. Let us assume conservatively your daily cognitive budget is 10,000 CEUs. A stable, focused mind allocates perhaps 1,000 CEUs to essential maintenance, basic bodily awareness, routine navigation. The remaining 9,000 are discretionary. They are deployed at your command. Now, impose the architecture of fragility. The vigilance tax claims 3,000 CEUs just for keeping the lights on in a state of low-grade panic. 2 minor reaction surcharges at 2,000 CEUs each wipe out another 4,000. You are now at 7,000 CEUs spent, and you have not yet executed a single deliberate productive act. Decision debt, through a series of poor choices made from a depleted state, easily consumes another 1,500. You are left with 1,500 discretionary CEUs, from a potential of 9,000. You are operating at 16.7% efficiency. You are a strategic asset running in safe mode, capable only of basic life support functions. This is not a metaphor. This is your operational reality, the feeling of being constantly tired yet unaccomplished, the inability to focus after lunch, the irritability that surfaces in the late afternoon, the collapse into mindless consumption at night. These are not character flaws, they are system readouts. They are the alerts flashing on your console, warning of critical power depletion. You have been trying to solve these symptoms with more coffee, with vague motivation, with self-reproach. This is like trying to power a city by hooking a battery to the main grid. It is a futile stopgap measure that ignores the fundamental design flaw. The grid itself is hemorrhaging energy through 1,000 unpatched leaks. Your reconnaissance mission provided the coordinates of those leaks. The email from a certain individual that triggers a 45-minute mental rehearsal of arguments. The specific social media platform whose interface alone induces a low-grade anxiety that lingers for hours. The time of day when your decision-making capacity plummets, leading to a cascade of poor nutritional and entertainment choices. These are not random, they are predictable. They are exploitable by the systems designed to capture your attention and by your own unexamined neural code. To not quantify this is to accept insolvency as a permanent state of being. Therefore, the next phase is not inspiration, it is instrumentation. You will convert your qualitative reconnaissance into a quantitative ledger. For the next 72 hours, you will not just observe triggers, you will assign them a cost. You will use a simple, brutal rubric. On a scale of 1 to 10, rate the cognitive drain of each incident. A 1 is a minor distraction, a fleeting irritation that costs you 5 minutes of refocusing effort. A 10 is a full system hijack, a rage, a panic, a despair that obliterates your productivity for half a day or more. Log the trigger, log the cost, log the cumulative total at the end of each day. Do not judge the entries, do not rationalize them. You are a forensic accountant for a corporation in receivership. Your only task is to discover where the money is going. The goal of this audit is to induce a specific calculated form of disgust, not an emotional self-loathing, but the cold, clear disgust of an engineer who discovers that 83% of his engine's horsepower is being wasted as friction and heat. This disgust is the necessary fuel for the demolition to come. You cannot be motivated to dismantle a system you vaguely suspect is inefficient. You must be compelled by the irrefutable numerical proof of its catastrophic failure. When you see, in black and white, that a single notification from a particular app has consistently triggered a Category 8 cognitive drain, your relationship to that app changes instantly. It is no longer a tool. It is a parasite. It is a hostile entity siphoning your cognitive capital. And you do not negotiate with parasites. You quarantine them. You excise them. This is the cost of instability. It is measured in lost hours, in foregone opportunities, in the silent erosion of your potential. It is a tax you have been paying to chaos your entire adult life. The audit ends the ignorance. The numbers on your ledger are the final argument against the fragile architecture. They are the objective, unemotional mandate for total overhaul. You now have the schematic of the fault lines from your reconnaissance, and you have the balance sheet proving their economic unsustainability. The case is closed. The verdict is in. The current operating system is not merely suboptimal, it is bankrupt. The next step is not an adjustment, it is a controlled demolition. But before we light the fuse, you must first establish a secure internal vantage point from which to observe the collapse without being buried in the rubble. You must build your observational post. Chapter 5. The first principle of command. Reclaiming your internal observational post. That secure vantage point is not a physical location. It is not a room or a retreat or a mountaintop. It is a position of consciousness, a hardened, elevated, and isolated node of pure awareness from which you can observe the entire theater of your own mind without being conscripted into its civil war. This is the first principle of command. Before you can issue a single order to your psychological forces, you must first establish where you, the commander, actually are. Most men spend their entire lives believing they are the battlefield itself. The chaos is them. The reaction is them. The fear, the anger, the scrolling, the craving. This is not something they have, it is something they are. This is the foundational error. The critical misidentification that turns every external stimulus into a direct hit on your core identity. To reclaim command, you must perform a surgical separation. You must extract the observer from the observed. Think of it in terms of network architecture. Your mind, as it currently operates, is a flat network. Every node, every thought, every emotion, every memory, every external notification communicates with every other node on the same level of authority. A critical email from your boss has the same network access privileges as a memory of a childhood failure. A random social media insult routes directly to the same servers that process your sense of self-worth. There is no firewall, no hierarchy, no demilitarized zone. This flat architecture is efficient for data sharing but catastrophic for security and stability. It guarantees cascading failures. A single packet of bad news can propagate through the entire system, triggering alarms in emotional centers, draining power from executive function, and corrupting data stores with irrational narratives. The system goes into lockdown. You are no longer in command. You are the system in meltdown. Your observational post is the creation of a separate, privileged layer in this architecture. It is the secure administrative console that exists outside the flat network of your reactive mind. From this console, you have read access to everything. You can see the email arrive. You can monitor the spike in heart rate, the flush of heat, the torrent of catastrophic thoughts beginning their viral replication. This is a disaster. I'm finished. They've lost all respect for me. But you are not in that torrent. You are watching its data stream scroll across your screen. This is the essence of metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, not to stop the thoughts, but to witness their genesis, their trajectory, and their decay without granting them executive authority. This post is your psychological high ground. From here, no emotional surge can overrun your position because you are not down in the valley fighting the flood. You are surveying the entire terrain from a place the water cannot reach. Building this post requires a deliberate, unglamorous protocol. It begins with a single-pointed exercise in sensory anchoring. You are not trying to achieve enlightenment. You are performing a systems check. Sit. Close your eyes. Now, audit one channel of raw data. The feeling of air moving in and out of your nostrils. The coolness on the inhalation. The slight warmth on the exhalation. Do not alter it. Do not romanticize it. Simply track the signal. Within seconds, you will experience the core problem. The flat network will attempt a hostile takeover. A thought about your overdue project will intrude. A memory of an awkward conversation will broadcast itself. An itch will form on your cheek, demanding attention. This is not failure. This is the intelligence operation you came for. You have just identified a packet of rogue traffic on your network. The moment you notice that you are lost in the thought, the moment you catch the itch as it is being manufactured, you have, for a nanosecond, returned to the observational post. You have severed the identification. The thought was happening. The you that noticed it is separate from it. That noticing is the console coming online. The enemy of this post is not distraction itself. It is the automatic unconscious fusion with distraction. When the critical email arrives, you don't see the thought, "This is a problem." You become the thought, "I am in a problem." Your identity merges with the assessment. Your entire psychological and physiological resource allocation is then commanded by that assessment. The observational post breaks the fusion. It allows you to deploy the Socratic protocol of command. Interrogate the data. Is this email truly a threat to my life? No. Is it a demand for a solution? Yes. Does panic improve solution generation? Biologically, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex needed for solving it. So the emotional response is not just unhelpful, it is actively sabotaging the required mission. This analysis is impossible from within the flat network. It is only possible from the detached, secure layer of the post. You are not arguing with the fear. You are auditing its faulty logic from a position of unassailable neutrality. This is not passivity. This is supreme active command. A general does not stand in the middle of the battlefield swinging his sword at every soldier who approaches. He is in the command bunker, looking at maps, reading dispatches, and allocating resources based on strategic priority. The soldier in the field experiences the chaos of bullet and mud. The general in the bunker experiences the chaos as information flows. Your anger, your anxiety, your lust, your laziness. These are not you. They are regiments of your psychological army. Some are elite forces. Some are unruly conscripts. Some are enemy agents wearing your uniform. From the flat network, they all scream with the same voice, demanding immediate action. From the observational post, you see their true designations. You see that the panic about a work deadline is a conscript, loud, undisciplined, and of low combat value. You see that the focused determination to solve the problem is a special forces unit, silent, patient, and high value. Command is the act of choosing which unit gets the order to advance and which is ordered to stand down. Your post must be fortified through relentless repetition. You will not build it in one session of focused breathing. You will build it by establishing checkpoints throughout the chaos of your day. The moment your phone buzzes with a notification, pause. Do not reach. Observe the reach. Feel the magnetic pull in your hand, the slight dopamine anticipation in your brain. You are now in the post, watching the launch sequence of a habitual reaction. The moment you are cut off in traffic, pause. Do not lean on the horn. Observe the surge of adrenaline, the flash of tribal insult, the narrative of disrespect forming. You are now in the post, intercepting a pre-programmed hostility protocol. Each pause is a sandbag reinforcing the walls. Each moment of observed separation is a wire you lay between the flat network and your command console. Over time, you are not building a temporary refuge. You are performing a permanent architectural overhaul of your mind, installing a dedicated, hardened control layer. Without this post, every tactic that follows is useless. You cannot build a firewall against external chaos if you are the chaos. You cannot pressure test your frame if you have no stable frame to test. You cannot install a new operating system while the old one is still executing commands in kernel panic mode. The observational post is the prerequisite for all engineering. It is the silent, non-reactive foundation upon which every pillar of resilience will be erected. It is where you go to remember what you are not. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your failures. You are not your accolades. You are the silent witness to all of it. The sovereign is not defined by the content of his kingdom, but by his unchanging position as its ruler. Your first act of sovereignty is to reclaim that position, to stand there in the silent center and survey the noise of your domain. The demolition of the fragile architecture can now begin. You are not in the building, you are at the controls. Chapter 6. The Doctrine of Non-Reaction. Building a firewall against external chaos. From this silent center, you observe the first law of mental thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. Every external event, every piece of chaos, every demand and insult and piece of bad news is a packet of raw, disordered energy broadcast into your environment. Your old architecture, the fragile mind, was designed to absorb that energy. It was a receiver, a sponge. It would take the kinetic force of an external event and allow it to convert directly into internal kinetic force, a spike of cortisol, a flood of adrenaline, a storm of reactive thought. This was the transfer. The chaos outside became the chaos inside. The energy moved from the world into you, and you spent your cognitive reserves to process it, to fight it, to fuel the emotional reaction it demanded. This is the definition of a leaky system. A system with no firewall. The doctrine of non-reaction is not passivity. It is not spiritual bypassing or naive optimism. It is a deliberate, engineered protocol for energy management. It is the installation of a one-way mirror and a surge protector between the external world and your internal command center. The energy still arrives. The packet of chaos still hits your perimeter, but it does not get to cross the threshold. It does not get to execute code in your core system. You observe it. You log it, you analyze its source, its payload, its intended effect, and then you choose, with the cold, deliberate authority of a network administrator, whether to allow, quarantine, or discard the packet. The energy is dissipated at the perimeter. It is grounded. It is transformed into data, not into reaction. The transfer is halted. Your internal energy budget remains intact. This is the foundational act of psychological sovereignty. You are no longer a receiver, you are a filter. Understand the anatomy of a reaction. It is a three-stage ballistic sequence, a legacy firmware installed by evolution. Stage 1 is perception. An event registers. A critical email arrives. Traffic grinds to a halt. A plan fails. Stage 2 is interpretation. The subconscious, operating on ancient threat assessment protocols, slaps a label on the event. Threat, injustice, loss. This label is almost always wrong for the modern context, but the system doesn't care. It runs the old code. Stage 3 is biochemical execution. The label triggers the amygdala, which hijacks the prefrontal cortex and floods the body with hormones designed for physical combat or flight. Your heart rate spikes. Your focus narrows to a tunnel. Your thinking becomes binary, emotional, and stupid. This entire sequence, from perception to full system hijack, can occur in under 300 milliseconds. You are being remote-controlled by a caveman's alarm system. The doctrine of non-reaction is about inserting a conscious buffer between stage 1 and stage 2. It is about intercepting the interpretation. You will hear the excuse, "I can't help it, it's automatic." This is the lie of the fragile mind, and you must incinerate it. What is automatic is the initial spark, the perception, the raw data. What is not automatic is your endorsement of the interpretation. That is a choice, a silent, microsecond choice you have been abdicating for years. When the critical email hits your inbox, there is a nanosecond of pure data, visual symbols on a screen. Then there is the void, the gap. In that gap, the subconscious tries to inject its story. This is an attack. This person disrespects you. Your competence is being questioned. The old you would have accepted that story as reality. It would have felt true, and so you would have believed it, and the biochemical cascade would have begun. The new protocol, engineered from your observational post, is to let the story hit a wall of silent, deliberate non-acceptance. You see the story being offered, you note its content, and you do not buy it. You do not grant it the authority to define your internal state. You hold the line at perception. The email is just text. The traffic jam is just stationary cars. The failed plan is just a new set of variables. The energy stops there. This requires a specific, drill-based form of mental discipline. Think of it as a sensory firewall rule. Your senses, sight, sound, the constant stream of digital information, are input ports. They are open, receiving billions of packets per day. The firewall rule you are installing is simple, but its enforcement is absolute. All incoming sensory data must be held in a buffer for conscious review before it is allowed to interact with your emotional and biochemical subsystems. In practice, this looks like a deliberate pause. It is not a long meditative pause, it is a tactical micro-pause. The moment you feel the first physiological tug of a reaction, the clench in the jaw, the heat in the face, the quickening of breath, that is your alert. That is the intrusion detection system flashing. Your immediate action is to sever the link between sensation and internal narrative. You do this with a physiological override. You take a single controlled breath that expands the diaphragm. You subtly straighten your posture. You might even name the incoming packet with clinical detachment. Packet detected. Label, perceived disrespect. Source, email client. Payload, anger. This act of naming and breathing is not trivial. It is a hard reset of the autonomic nervous system. It signals to the entire organism that the conscious mind is now in command, that the legacy threat response protocol is being overridden. You are manually taking control of a system that is trying to auto-run into chaos. Now we pressure test the doctrine against the most common vectors of attack. Consider the chaos of other people's emotional states. A colleague enters your space radiating anxiety, frustration, or panic. The fragile mind, lacking a firewall, will immediately attempt to synchronize with that energy. It will absorb the chaos like a tuning fork picking up a vibration. You will feel their anxiety become your anxiety. Their urgent problem will feel like your urgent problem. This is a catastrophic energy leak. The doctrine of non-reaction dictates that you observe their state as you would observe a storm front on a radar screen. You note its intensity, its direction, its potential for disruption. But you do not let it change your internal barometric pressure. You maintain your own climate. Your response is calibrated, helpful if strategy dictates, but never resonant. You are a non-reactive object in their field of chaos. Your calm becomes a dissipative force, grounding their disordered energy without absorbing it. They may flail. You do not flail with them. You are the wall the wave breaks against. Consider the chaos of unexpected failure. A deal collapses. A project you invested in goes to zero. The fragile mind interprets this through the story of personal deficiency. I am a failure. I am not good enough. The world is unfair. This story triggers a cascade of shame, anger, and despondency that can drain your cognitive energy for days. The firewall rule here is to strip the event of all narrative and treat it as a systems analysis. From your observational post, you examine the failure as a set of inputs and outputs, decisions and outcomes. What variables were miscalculated? What assumptions proved false? What feedback was ignored? The event is no longer a judgment on your soul. It is a data dump from a complex simulation. The energy of the failure is not converted into emotional reaction. It is converted into forensic intelligence. The pain of the event is transformed into the power of a lesson. The energy is not wasted, it is repurposed. This is alchemy. You are turning leaden outcomes into golden insight because you refused to let the initial impact trigger a meltdown. The ultimate test is the chaos of sheer absurdity. The pointless bureaucratic hurdle, the senseless criticism, the random inconvenience that serves no purpose but to waste your time and test your patience. This is friction designed to provoke a reaction, to make you spend your energy on nothing. The fragile mind, ever the receiver, will rise to the bait every time. It will fume, it will complain. It will tell the story of injustice to anyone who will listen, burning precious focus and social capital on a battle that cannot be won because it isn't even a real battle. It's a distraction. The doctrine of non-reaction sees this for what it is. Noise. Pure, meaningless noise. Your firewall is configured to discard these packets automatically. They are logged as low-priority nuisance and deleted without ever reaching your conscious processing queue. You do not engage, you do not explain, you do not internalize. You navigate the absurdity with the detached efficiency of a soldier moving through a known minefield, carefully, without emotional investment in the terrain itself. Your energy is preserved for the objectives that actually matter. This doctrine finds its most critical application in the silent war of your daily environment. You are sitting at your workstation, the intended focus of a deep work block. Then the siege begins. A notification chimes from your phone. An alert pops up on your monitor. Outside your window, a construction vehicle starts beeping. The fragile mind would treat each of these as an interrupt command. It would flick its attention to each new stimulus, breaking its state, draining its focus, and requiring massive energy to rebuild concentration each time. This is death by 1,000 cuts. Your cognitive energy is bled out in micro-reactions. The installed protocol is different. From your observational post, you hear the chime, you see the alert, you register the beeping, and you consciously, deliberately, do not turn your head. You do not let your eyes flicker. You do not grant the stimulus the authority to redirect your attention. You acknowledge its existence in your peripheral awareness, and you keep your focus locked on the primary target. You are teaching your brain a new hierarchy of command. The conscious, chosen mission outranks all automated, stimulus-driven responses. Each time you succeed, you reinforce the firewall. Each time you fail, you weaken it. This is the grind. This is the rep-by-rep construction of an unbreakable focus. The transition from theory to terrain is not gradual. It is a binary switch you throw in a moment of deliberate application. So let us construct a scenario. Tomorrow morning at precisely 9:17 a.m. you will receive a message. It might be a text, an email, a direct message in an application. The content will be, in some way, professionally critical. It will point out a flaw, a delay, or an error that can be plausibly tied to your actions. The tone will not be overtly hostile, but it will carry the subtle voltage of disappointment from someone whose opinion you value. This is the packet. This is the test. Your old architecture will scream to life. The story of threat to status will try to inject itself. The physiological hijack will begin its launch sequence. Your task is to execute the doctrine. The moment you read the words and feel the first jolt, you stop. You place the device face down, or you minimize the window. You do not reply. You do not mentally rehearse defenses. You take one deliberate, diaphragmatic breath, feeling your chest expand and your shoulders settle. You are in the observational post. You name the packet. Packet received. Label, professional correction. Source, external. Payload, initial ego threat. You sit with the raw sensation, the tightness, the heat, without following the story it is trying to tell. You let the biochemical wave crest and break against the wall of your non-engagement. You watch it recede. After 90 seconds, you return to the message. You read it again, this time as a pure data stream. Strip the emotional subtext. What is the factual correction being offered? Is it valid? If yes, the required action is acknowledgement and course correction, not self-flagellation. If no, the required action is a calm, factual clarification. The energy of the event has been contained and converted. It did not become a 2-hour spiral of anxiety and distracted rage. It became a 30-second administrative task. You have just defended your cognitive energy budget from a significant attack. You have just proven that the chaos outside remains outside unless you personally open the gate and invite it in for a costly negotiation. The firewall held. The doctrine is no longer theory. It is operational protocol. The silent center has defended its perimeter. This is how you begin to build, not from fragility, but from impregnable calm. Chapter 7. Pressure testing your frame. Drills for unexpected failure and adversity. The firewall held, but a firewall is a static defense. It is a perimeter. It is designed to repel unsophisticated ambient noise. What happens when the attack is not a random probe? What happens when the siege engine is not a careless email, but a structural failure in your own plans? When the ground beneath your command post gives way, a firewall cannot stop an earthquake. A doctrine of non-reaction is useless if the chaos is not outside, but within the very architecture you rely upon. This is the next frontier. You have learned to remain calm while the world shouts. Now you must learn to remain calm while your own blueprint cracks. This is pressure testing. This is the deliberate induction of failure to prove the resilience of the frame. Consider the engineering principle of a pressure vessel. It is not certified by theoretical calculations alone. It is subjected to forces far beyond its intended operational load. Hydraulic pressure is increased until the metal groans. Sensors map every microstrain. The test is not to see if it works under ideal conditions. The test is to find its exact failure point so that its operational limits are known with absolute empirical certainty. Your psychological frame is no different. You have built internal defenses. You have established a silent center. But what is its actual yield strength? You will not discover this by reading philosophy in a quiet room. You will discover it only when the system is subjected to deliberate, escalating stress. You must become the architect and the testing engineer of your own mind. You must induce the earthquake to prove the foundation. The modern mind avoids this at all costs. It conflates comfort with stability. It mistakes the absence of immediate pressure for genuine strength. This is the architecture of the fragile mind in its final, most insidious form, a beautifully designed structure that has never felt a true lateral wind. It believes itself to be solid because nothing has challenged it. This is an illusion. It is a simulation of resilience. When the first real gust arrives, a project collapsing, a betrayal in trust, a sudden loss, the structure fails not at the joints, but at its core. It experiences a cascading systems collapse because it has no data on its own failure modes. It has never been pressure tested. Your mission is to generate that data yourself, proactively, under controlled conditions. You must invite the storm into the laboratory. Begin with the anatomy of a failure spiral. When an unexpected adversity strikes the untrained mind, it triggers a cascade across three parallel systems. First, the cognitive narrative. The mind immediately constructs a story of catastrophe. This is not a factual assessment, it is a runaway simulation, extrapolating the single data point of failure into an infinite loop of negative outcomes. The client rejected the proposal becomes, "I am a fraud, the firm will collapse, my career is over." This narrative is not logic. It is a neural script, a pre-written disaster movie triggered by the amygdala. Second, the physiological response. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. Heart rate spikes, vision tunnels. The body is mobilized for a physical threat that does not exist, burning precious cognitive fuel on a biochemical false alarm. Third, the emotional payload. A wave of shame, anxiety, or anger hits. This is the feeling of the ground falling away. The untrained mind fuses with this triad. It becomes the catastrophic story, the jangled nerves, the surge of panic. It has no separation. This is the reactive trigger, now activated by internal structural failure instead of external noise. Your observational post is the counter to this cascade. But observing a theoretical failure is not the same as observing a real one. The post must be hardened under fire. This is where drills begin. A drill is not an abstract meditation. It is a scheduled, concrete, often uncomfortable action designed to simulate a specific point of failure in a controlled environment. Its purpose is to expose the gap between your intellectual understanding of resilience and your visceral, automatic reaction to stress. To close that gap through repetition, to make the doctrine of non-reaction operational not just against external chaos, but against the internal chaos of your own plans unraveling. Drill 1. The deliberate inconvenience. This targets your entitlement to smoothness. Each day you will schedule a minor, deliberate fracture in your routine. You will take a cold shower not for health, but for the psychological friction. You will drive a longer, slower route to an important meeting. You will place your phone in another room for 4 hours of deep work and tolerate the phantom limb sensation of disconnection. The objective is not masochism. The objective is to pressure test your attachment to comfort and predictability. When you choose the cold water, you observe the immediate protest from your body. You observe the mental bargaining. Just make it quick. This is pointless. You do not argue with these thoughts. You let them broadcast from the cognitive narrative system. You feel the physiological shock. You feel the urge to react, to escape, and from your observational post, you simply let the systems run their script. You watch the cascade begin, and you do not feed it with action. You let the cold be cold. You let the inconvenience be inconvenient. You collect the data. You note the exact moment the protest peaks and then begins to subside. This is the yield point. This is where you learn that discomfort is a data stream, not a command. Drill 2. The strategic withholding of validation. This targets your addiction to external reward, the digital siege made personal. You will complete a meaningful piece of work, a report, a proposal, a physical set at the gym, and you will tell no one. You will create value and then deliberately sever the feedback loop. You will not post it. You will not mention it. You will not seek the likes or the acknowledgement. You will let the accomplishment sit in silence. Observe what happens. The cognitive narrative will immediately scream that the act is worthless without recognition. It will label it a waste. It will demand you extract the social validation you have been trained to expect. The physiological system may grow agitated, seeking the dopamine hit that has been withheld. The emotional payload may be a faint sense of emptiness, of effort unredeemed. Your drill is to sit in that silence, to let the work be its own reward. This pressure tests the structural integrity of your motivation. Is it dependent on external reinforcement, or is it self-sustaining? This drill exposes the fault line. It shows you where your ego is still wired to the approval matrix. Each time you withstand the urge to seek validation, you reinforce an internal load-bearing wall. You prove your worth is not a function of external notification. Drill 3. The introduction of controlled interference. This targets your ability to maintain focus amidst internal sabotage. During a critical 90-minute deep work session, you will set an intermittent timer. Every 17 minutes it will sound. Your task is not to stop working. Your task is to, upon the sound, intentionally introduce a single, vividly negative thought about the work itself. This is going to fail. You don't know what you're doing. This is a waste of time. You will inject this thought deliberately from your observational post. Then you will return to the work. This is a direct assault on your concentration. It simulates the internal chaos of self-doubt and anxiety that arises during genuine high-stakes pressure. The drill teaches you to decouple the intrusive thought from the executive action. The thought is not a command to stop. It is merely noise on the cognitive channel. By intentionally generating the interference, you strip it of its power. You become the source of the attack, and therefore its master. You learn that the thought of failure and the act of failing are two entirely separate systems. One can be active while the other remains perfectly operational. These drills generate failure data. They map your fault lines. The moment of the cold water shock, the itch for validation, the sting of the injected doubt. These are your personal yield points. This data is more valuable than any motivational quote. It is the metallurgical report on your own soul. It tells you that when pressure reaches X level, your instinct is to flee. When recognition is withheld for Y duration, your motivation shows a fatigue crack. This is not weakness exposed, this is intelligence gathered. A general does not fear discovering where his defenses are thin. He fears not knowing. Now, scale the principle. Apply pressure testing to your larger frameworks. Commit to a difficult public goal with a high probability of stumbles. Launch the project, have the hard conversation, risk the artistic endeavor. Do this not because you are sure of success, but because you need to pressure test your entire identity under the load of potential, very public failure. This is the full-scale seismic test. When the inevitable obstacles arise, the criticism, the delay, the moment of sheer incompetence, you will have a choice. You can fuse with the cognitive catastrophe narrative, or you can retreat to your observational post and review the data from your drills. You have felt this sensation before, in the cold shower, in the silence after withheld validation. You have already observed the physiological surge and let it pass. You have already introduced the worst thought and kept working. This larger failure is not a new category of event. It is simply a higher amplitude on the same waveform. You have already calibrated your instruments for this. The goal is not to become impervious to feeling. It is to become impervious to unforced psychological collapse. A pressure-tested frame bends. It absorbs the shock. It distributes the strain across its hardened members. It may even develop permanent deformations, the scars of experience, but it does not shatter. It does not experience cascading failure. When the earthquake passes, the structure is still standing. It is battle-damaged, perhaps, but it is operational, and now it possesses new, earned data. It knows it can withstand a magnitude 7.0 event. Your confidence is no longer a theory, it is a tested fact. Your calm is no longer the calm of quiet waters. It is the calm of the pressure vessel that has been tested to its limits and now rests, humming, within its known operational parameters. The chaos is no longer outside or even inside. It is simply a force you have measured, mapped, and mastered. The firewall was your perimeter defense. This is your structural integrity. The silent center now resides within a proven frame. Chapter 8. Forging the Unbreakable Protocol. Routines for Psychological Resilience. This proven frame is not a static monument. It is a living architecture. And like all high-performance architectures, it requires a maintenance protocol. A set of non-negotiable daily operations that prevent corrosion, reinforce load-bearing members, and ensure the entire system remains within its optimal performance envelope. Without this protocol, your resilience is merely episodic. A temporary state achieved under duress, which will inevitably degrade back to its default fragile configuration once the pressure subsides. You have mapped the fault lines. You have pressure-tested the structure. Now you must install the permanent, automated systems that make resilience your baseline state. This is the engineering of the unbreakable mind. This is the move from heroic, momentary endurance to silent, perpetual readiness. Consider the fundamental law of entropy. All systems left unattended tend toward disorder. Your psychological state is no exception. The default pull of the modern world is toward fragmentation, distraction, and reactivity. Your digital environment is a constant entropic force, injecting noise and demanding splintered attention. Your own neural circuitry, with its ancient bias for threat detection and short-term reward, is an internal engine of chaos if left to its own devices. To believe you can achieve a state of resilience through willpower alone, through remembering your lessons only when the crisis hits, is a catastrophic error in judgment. It is like believing you can maintain peak physical condition by exercising only when you are sick. Resilience is not a reaction. It is a precondition, and a precondition must be engineered into the system through ritual, through repetition, through the cold, mechanical installation of correct daily practice. The protocol begins not with addition, but with subtraction. You have already identified the energy drains. You have audited the cognitive taxes. The first operational order is to permanently defund the enemy's operations. This is not about motivation. This is about logistics. If your cognitive energy is a finite fuel supply, you must shut off every leak in the pipeline before you can power your own forward movement. This means enacting a digital demilitarized zone, a specific, non-negotiable window of time each day where every device capable of injecting unsolicited information is powered down, not silenced, not set to do not disturb, powered off. This is not a lifestyle suggestion, it is a tactical blackout. For that period, the external grid does not exist. Your mind is forced to interface only with its own resources, with the physical environment, with deliberate thought. The withdrawal symptoms will be acute. Your brain, trained to receive a dopamine ping every few minutes, will scream for stimulation. It will manufacture emergencies. It will tell you that you are missing something critical. This is the protocol working. You are not listening to the screams of an addict to decide if he needs his drug. You are enforcing the quarantine. The goal is to reset your brain's expectation of constant input, to recalibrate its tolerance for stillness, to restore its ability to generate its own momentum rather than merely reacting to external pulses. Parallel to this, you institute the morning reconnaissance. The first 30 minutes of your waking consciousness are the most strategically valuable terrain of your day. Whoever or whatever controls this territory sets the tone for the entire campaign. Surrendering this ground to a smartphone, to news feeds, to the agendas of others, is a unilateral disarmament. Your protocol must claim this ground with absolute authority. The reconnaissance is a silent, internal patrol of your own mental state. You do not seek to change anything in this window. You observe. You sit in stillness and you run a diagnostic. You note the quality of your thoughts without engaging them. You observe the emotional weather patterns without being swept away by them. You are the watchman in the tower, scanning the horizon of your own psyche, reporting conditions back to command. This is not meditation for spiritual enlightenment. This is intelligence gathering. It provides you with a real-time status report before you commit a single unit of cognitive energy. Are there latent anxieties from yesterday? Is there a sense of lethargy or unfocused agitation? This data is critical. It allows you to deploy your resources with precision throughout the day, rather than walking blindly into ambushes set by your own unresolved internal states. Following the reconnaissance, you deploy the day's primary objective. This is a single defined cognitive peak, the one task that, if accomplished, would render the day a strategic victory regardless of what else happens. You identify it the night before. You write it down in unambiguous, actionable language. Upon completing your morning reconnaissance, you attack this objective with undiluted focus during your highest energy window. You defend this time block with the same ferocity you would defend a vital position. This practice builds psychological momentum. It creates a core of accomplishment that nothing can erode. Even if the rest of the day descends into chaos, you have secured your primary hill. This is the antithesis of the reactive, task-switching fragility that defines the modern workflow. It is the deliberate offensive concentration of force on a single point of breakthrough. Each day you do this, you reinforce the neural pathway of deep, sustained focus. You strengthen the mental muscle of finishing what you start. You build a history of small daily victories that form the bedrock of your self-trust. The protocol then mandates physical fortification. You must stop conceptualizing your body and mind as separate entities. They are a single, integrated system. A weak, underslept, malnourished and stagnant physical platform cannot host a resilient mind. The mind may have brilliant ideas, but the system will lack the endurance, the stability, the raw biochemical foundation to execute them under pressure. Your protocol must include non-negotiable physical stressors that are entirely within your control, not for aesthetics, for system performance. This is the daily proof that you can impose your will on your own physiology. A rigorous strength session, a sustained cardiovascular effort. A mobility drill that pushes the limits of your range of motion. The specific modality is less important than the consistency and the intentionality. You are not just exercising. You are conducting a daily stress test on your physical vessel. You are teaching your nervous system to tolerate discomfort, to regulate breathing under duress, to push past the point of mental protest. This physical mastery directly wires into psychological resilience. The man who has commanded his body to complete one more rep, to run one more mile, when every signal screamed to stop, has just rehearsed the exact neural sequence required to push through a psychological barrier. The body's fortitude becomes the mind's blueprint. As the day progresses, the protocol installs micropauses. These are deliberate circuit breakers. Every 60 to 90 minutes, you disengage from all focused work for a period of 5 to 10 minutes. You do not use this time to check messages or consume content. You stand. You look out a window at a distant horizon. You walk without a destination. You simply exist outside the stream of directed thought. This is not a break for leisure. It is a tactical reset for the prefrontal cortex. It prevents cognitive fatigue from accumulating into a fog that impairs judgment and increases reactivity. These pauses are the scheduled maintenance that keeps the machine from overheating. They are the moments where you step back from the tactical map and reorient to the strategic landscape. They prevent the tunnel vision that causes men to make stupid, reactive decisions in the heat of a long engagement. The protocol culminates in the evening audit. This is the after-action review for your day. Conducted not with self-flagellation or pride, but with the cold detachment of a special forces operator debriefing a mission, you review the primary objective. Was it achieved? If not, what was the point of failure? Was it a planning error, an external interruption, or an internal surrender? You review your reactions. Where did you hold the line of non-reaction? Where did you breach it? What was the trigger? You review your energy levels. When did you peak? When did you crash? What drained you? This audit is not about creating a ledger of good and bad. It is about generating actionable intelligence. It converts the raw, often chaotic data of lived experience into a refined database of personal performance metrics. Over time, patterns emerge. You discover your true productive rhythms, your most vulnerable hours, your most reliable triggers. This self-knowledge is power. It allows you to design your tomorrow based on the empirical data of your yesterday, not on wishful thinking or generic advice. Finally, the protocol enforces the sanctity of physiological recovery. Sleep is not downtime. It is the most critical phase of the resilience cycle. It is when the mind consolidates learning, processes emotional residue, and repairs the metabolic wear and tear of the day. To compromise on sleep is to deliberately sabotage your entire protocol. You cannot build resilience on a foundation of chronic debt. Your protocol must defend your sleep window with ruthless priority. This means a consistent pre-sleep ritual that signals to your nervous system that the operational day is over. A digital sunset, 1 hour before bed. A period of low-stimulus activity, perhaps reading physical material that requires linear thought. Perhaps light reflection or planning for the next day. The room must be cool, dark, and silent. This is not pampering. This is the systematic shutdown and reboot sequence for the most complex system you will ever command. A single night of poor recovery can reduce your cognitive bandwidth, increase your emotional reactivity, and degrade your willpower by measurable, significant percentages. You would not send a soldier into a firefight with faulty ammunition and no rest. Do not send your mind into its daily battles under the same conditions. This is the Unbreakable protocol. It is mundane, it is repetitive, it lacks the drama of a crisis overcome. And that is precisely its power. It operates below the level of conscious struggle. It automates the conditions for resilience so that you do not have to constantly think about being resilient. The morning reconnaissance grounds you. The primary objective focuses you. The physical fortification strengthens you. The micro-pauses reset you. The evening audit informs you. The recovery cycle repairs you. Day after day, this is not a philosophy, it is an operating system. Each element is a subroutine that runs in the background, maintaining system integrity, preventing the accumulation of entropy, and ensuring that when true pressure arrives, as it inevitably will, your structure is not just temporarily hardened, but permanently fortified. Your calm is no longer an interval between storms. It is the climate you have engineered. The firewall defends the perimeter. The pressure-tested frame provides the structure. This protocol is the daily maintenance that ensures neither will ever fail you. You are no longer building resilience. You are living inside it. Chapter 9. Integration and Deployment. Installing the new operating system. You are living inside it, but a system, no matter how elegantly designed, is inert until it is executed. A blueprint is not a building. A schematic is not a circuit alive with current. This is the moment of truth, the transition from theory to praxis, from understanding to embodiment. This chapter is about the final, irreversible step. The integration and deployment of your new psychological architecture. It is the process of taking the isolated components, the observational post, the doctrine of non-reaction, the pressure-tested frame, the unbreakable protocol, and fusing them into a single, seamless, conscious entity. You are not adding tools to a toolbox. You are installing a new operating system. The old one, the fragile, reactive, energy-bleeding program, must be completely overwritten. Consider the nature of an operating system. It is the fundamental software that manages all of a computer's hardware and software resources. It provides common services for computer programs. It is the interface between the raw machine and the user. Your old operating system was written by evolution, edited by trauma, and corrupted by a digital environment of instant gratification. Its core directive was survival through threat detection and emotional reaction. Its user interface was anxiety, impulsivity, and cognitive drain. You have spent the preceding chapters reverse engineering this faulty code. You have identified its memory leaks, its infinite loops of worry, its vulnerable permissions that allowed external chaos to run administrative commands on your internal state. Now you must write the new code, and then you must compile it, and then you must run it exclusively in perpetuity. Integration is not an intellectual exercise. It is a physiological and neurological recalibration. It is the rewiring of synaptic pathways that have been firing in the same desperate sequences for decades. Each time you successfully execute a pause instead of a reaction, you are not just being patient. You are physically carving a new neural channel. You are depositing myelin along a pathway of conscious choice, making it faster, more efficient, more default. Each time you observe an emotional trigger from your observational post and choose not to engage its narrative, you are not just staying calm. You are decommissioning an old emotional circuit. You are reducing its electrochemical authority. This is the silent, microscopic work of deployment. It happens in the milliseconds between stimulus and your chosen response. It is the installation process, happening in real time with every single decision you make. The old system will fight its own obsolescence. This is not a metaphor. The neural networks associated with your former fragility have enjoyed a monopoly on your cognitive energy. They are entrenched. They will send error messages. These error messages will feel like profound truths. This is just who I am. This situation is different. It justifies my anger. I'll start the protocol tomorrow. Today I'm too tired. These are not insights. They are the last gasps of a dying program attempting to maintain its jurisdiction. Your task is to recognize these messages for what they are, legacy code attempting to execute. You do not debate with error messages. You acknowledge their presence, you note their content as data, and you proceed with the installation of the new system. This requires a specific, ruthless form of awareness. You must become the system administrator of your own consciousness. This role is technical, not emotional. Your primary function is to monitor processes. Is the current process, this spiral of thought, this simmering resentment, this burst of anxiety, serving the new operating system's core directive of unassailable calm and strategic action? Or is it a legacy process, a ghost in the machine, draining resources? If it is the latter, you do not judge it. You do not lament it. You terminate it. You open the command line of your observational post and you input the kill code, non-identification. This is a legacy process. It is not me. It does not dictate my actions. And then you initiate the new sequence, a breath that anchors you in the physical present, a deliberate survey of the factual landscape, a choice aligned with your protocol. This administrative action, repeated 10, 50, 100 times a day, is the installation. Deployment moves from the internal to the external. It is the expression of your new architecture in the theater of your daily life. Your protocol, the reconnaissance, the objective, the fortification, the pauses, the audit, is the daily maintenance routine of this new system. But deployment is how the system handles real-time inputs. Imagine a critical meeting where your proposal is abruptly shot down. The old system would immediately initiate a cascade, the flush of humiliation, threat to social status, the defensive anger, counter-attack protocol, the internal narrative of injustice, cognitive drain loop. Under the new system, the input is received. The observational post registers the physiological jolt, the initial spark of emotion. The doctrine of non-reaction activates. The pause is inserted. In that space, the system analyzes. The rejection is a fact. Is it a threat to my physical existence? No. Is my emotional response useful data or a useless legacy reaction? It is data indicating I am invested, but it is a legacy reaction to interpret this as a personal annihilation. What is the strategic response? To inquire calmly, to absorb the feedback, to disengage and recalibrate. The system executes the chosen response, cleanly, without residual static. The event concludes. It remains an external event. It does not become an internal catastrophe. This is deployment in action. The true test of deployment is not in controlled environments. It is in the seepage of mundane misery. The flat tire in the rain, the petty betrayal by a colleague, the nagging unresolved tension in a personal relationship. These are the distributed denial-of-service attacks on your peace. They come not as a single catastrophic hack, but as a million tiny data packets of irritation, each one insignificant alone, but collectively capable of crashing an unstable system. Your new operating system must handle this traffic. It does so through granular sovereignty. It processes each packet individually. The flat tire is a logistical problem to be solved, not a philosophical indictment of your day. The colleague's betrayal is a tactical variable to be managed, not a wound to be nursed. The relationship tension is a dynamic to be addressed with clarity, not a swamp to be lost in. By refusing to aggregate these minor inputs into a major narrative of a bad day or a cursed life, you prevent the cascade failure. You compartmentalize not out of repression, but out of profound architectural integrity. Each issue is handled in its own container, its emotional payload quarantined and dissipated. The final stage of deployment is the realization that you are no longer a user of the system. You have become the system. The observational post is not a place you visit. It is the permanent seat of your awareness. The pause is not a technique you apply. It is the inherent rhythm of your cognition. The protocol is not a checklist you follow. It is the circadian rhythm of a psyche that has optimized itself for dominance. This is the point of integration. The components vanish into the whole. You are not doing resilience. You are expressing resilience as naturally as your heart beats or your lungs draw air. The effortful becomes effortless. The conscious becomes subconscious. The installed operating system becomes the only reality you can perceive because it is the filter through which all perception now flows. This transition is witnessed not in the fire, but in the cold morning. You wake. There is no internal negotiation, no battle against the gravity of the sheets. The system boots. The morning reconnaissance is not a discipline, it is simply how consciousness arrives. You see the day as a field of potential actions, not a gauntlet of potential threats. You move. A problem arises during your work. There is no clench in the chest, no flood of adrenaline. There is a cool recognition of an obstacle and a smooth engagement of cognitive resources to navigate it. Someone speaks to you with disrespect. The words hit the air and dissolve into data. You hear their meaning, but you do not receive their emotional charge. You respond from a place of unshakable compositional authority, not from a triggered defense mechanism. By the day's end, you are not depleted, you are functionally whole. The evening audit reveals no system crashes, no major memory leaks, only the normal wear of a machine operating within its specifications. This is the tangible reality. This is the deployed life. The world of noise continues to broadcast on all frequencies. But you are no longer a passive receiver, scrambling to tune into every signal, battered by the static. You have built your own transmitter. Its signal is a steady, low-frequency pulse of intentionality. It broadcasts on a single, private channel. Your purpose. The chaos of the external world can no longer hijack your receiver because you are no longer listening for its validation, its approval, or its threats. You are listening to your own operational hum. The installation is complete. The system is live. You are now, irrevocably, the source code of your own calm. The architecture is no longer a concept. It is the ground you walk on. The firewall is not a defense. It is the boundary of your being. The resilience is not an achievement. It is your native state. From here, there is no going back. You can only move forward, operating with a clarity so profound it feels like a silent, unbreakable law of your own universe. Chapter 10. The Sovereign Baseline. Maintaining Dominance in a World of Noise. From this new ground, a final operational truth emerges. The architecture is built, the firewall is active, the system is live, but the mission is not over. It has simply changed phase. You are no longer in construction mode, you are in maintenance mode. And maintenance is not passive. It is the most active form of warfare. It is the silent, daily defense of a territory you have conquered. This is the sovereign baseline. Not a peak to reach, but a floor you will never again fall beneath. It is the non-negotiable standard of your internal environment, the minimum viable condition for your consciousness. Any deviation below this line is now classified as a system failure. It triggers an immediate and automated protocol. This is your final doctrine, the doctrine of permanent dominance. Consider the physics of any complex system, a nuclear submarine operating at crush depth, a satellite holding geosynchronous orbit, a power grid sustaining a metropolis. These systems do not achieve stability and then ignore their instruments. Their operators do not celebrate the achievement of a stable reactor core and then walk away. Stability is the result of constant microscopic corrections, a relentless feedback loop of sensor data, adjustment and recalibration. Your mind is now that kind of system. High performance, mission critical. Operating in a hostile environment, the noise of the world is the ocean pressure against your hull. The chaos of external events is the cosmic radiation pummeling your senses. Your sovereignty is the reactor core, and it requires the same disciplined vigilance. The moment you believe the work is done, you have already begun the descent back into reactivity. The baseline is not a resting place. It is an active station you man for life. This baseline is defined by 3 core parameters, 3 metrics that give you a digital readout of your internal state. The first is emotional neutrality as your default setting, not numbness, not indifference, but a calibrated 0 point. A center of gravity so stable that external events must exert significant legitimate force to create a temporary operational tilt. Most of what the world throws at you is psychological spam. A missed email is not a crisis. A rude comment is not an assault. A change of plans is not a sabotage. Your old, fragile mind interpreted all these as system-level threats. Your new architecture registers them as low-priority data packets. They are logged, they are processed, they are resolved or deleted. They do not get to execute code that changes your emotional operating system. You feel what is necessary to feel for the task at hand, nothing more, nothing less. This neutrality is your strategic reserve of cognitive energy. It is the power you do not waste. The second parameter is the seamless integration of your tactical pause. The doctrine of non-reaction is no longer a conscious tool you reach for. It is the inherent latency built into your entire perceptual hardware. The stimulus hits, and there is now a mandatory processing gap, a buffer. This gap is where your sovereignty lives. In the early days of training, you had to consciously insert this pause. You fought to create that space. Now, the space is simply there. It is the architecture itself. An insult arrives. In the buffer, you see it for what it is, the emotional vomit of another fragile system projecting its instability. A financial setback manifests. In the buffer, you immediately begin a resource assessment and generate contingency options. The emotional storm tries to form, but it finds no conductive material in your mind. The pathways have been insulated. The pause is now autonomic. It is your psychological immune system, identifying threats and neutralizing them before they can infect your decision-making. The third parameter is purpose as your primary guidance system, not motivation, not fleeting desire, but a cold, navigational purpose. This is the single frequency your transmitter broadcasts. When you are on baseline, all sensory input, all events, all interactions are filtered through one ruthless question: does this serve the mission? The mission is not some grandiose life goal shouted from a stage. It is the immediate tactical objective of this day, this hour, this moment, aligned with your deeper direction. The colleague who wants to gossip is noise. The algorithm offering endless scroll is noise. The internal voice demanding you seek validation is noise. They are all signals attempting to jam your frequency. Your baseline operation involves continuously tuning them out. You are not ignoring the world. You are prioritizing it with extreme prejudice. 99% of what clamors for your attention is discarded at the perimeter. It never reaches the command center. This creates a profound silence. And in that silence, your own signal comes in loud and clear. Maintaining this triad requires a new kind of discipline. Not the discipline of building, but the discipline of garrison duty. It is less dramatic, infinitely more difficult, because the enemy is no longer your obvious chaos. It is entropy. It is complacency. It is the slow, almost imperceptible drift back towards old, easy patterns. Your brain's old wiring, those deep fault lines of reactivity, are still there. They are decommissioned, but they are not demolished. They lie in wait, like abandoned code, ready to execute if your vigilance falters. Your daily protocols from Chapter 8 are no longer training exercises. They are system diagnostics. Your morning recon is a check of all three parameters. Your physical training is a stress test of your emotional container. Your nightly audit is a review of the day's logs, searching for any unauthorized processes that ran, any breaches in the firewall. You will have failures. This is not a possibility. It is a certainty. The sovereign baseline is not a force field. It is a recovery speed. The metric of your dominance is not whether you ever get knocked off center. It is the time it takes you to recognize the deviation and execute the correction. A system without redundancy is a fragile system. You have built-in redundancy. The moment you feel the old heat of reactive anger, that is your alert siren. The moment you find yourself mindlessly scrolling, that is your perimeter breach alarm. The moment you are speaking to seek approval, that is your signal integrity warning. These are not moral failures. They are system alerts. They are data. Your response is not self-flagellation. It is a tactical reboot. You engage the pause. You return to the observational post. You recenter on the mission. The entire process, from deviation to correction, should eventually take seconds, then milliseconds. The blip on your radar is contained and neutralized before it can become a narrative. The world's noise will intensify in response to your silence. This is a law of social physics. When you cease reacting, when you cease feeding the drama machines with your emotional energy, you become an anomaly, you become a void, and nature abhors a vacuum. People, systems, media, they will try to fill your silence with their noise. They will provoke you to gauge your strength. They will tempt you with old vices to test your resolution. They will label your calm as arrogance, your focus as coldness, your sovereignty as a threat. See this for what it is, the system attempting to re-assimilate a rogue node. Your lack of reaction is a power they cannot comprehend and cannot control. Their increased efforts are a sign that your signal is strong. Do not engage in this warfare on their terms. You do not fight the noise. You simply continue broadcasting your own frequency at low power with unwavering consistency. You become a lighthouse. The storm rages around you. You do not rage back. You simply continue sending out the beam. Let the ships that need your light use it to navigate. Let the others wreck themselves against the rocks. That is not your mission. Your mission from this day forward is maintenance of the self. You are the engineer, the operator, and the sovereign of a now proven system. The archive of resilience is not a book you close. It is a live feed you monitor. The chaos of the age will continue. The fractures in the world will deepen. This is irrelevant to your operation. Your internal territory is secured. Your resources are allocated. Your protocols are running. You have moved beyond seeking resilience against storms. You have engineered an internal climate that renders the storm a superficial phenomenon. The wind howls. But inside the command center, the instruments are steady. The lights are calm. The course is set. This is the end of the beginning. The noise has not stopped, but your need to listen to it has. You are now, and forever, the source of your own signal. The broadcast is perpetual. The frequency is yours. The baseline is held. This is dominance, not over others, over the chaos that was once yourself. The archive is complete. The only entry left to make is the date and the simple sovereign notation, system nominal. All parameters green. The calm holds. Conclusion. Beyond resilience. The architecture of unassailable calm. You have reached the end of the manual. The theory is complete. The protocols are installed. You now possess the schematics for a mind that cannot be breached. This was never about finding happiness. That is a transient signal, a flicker on the dashboard. Our objective was always operational integrity, to build a system so coherent, so internally aligned, that external volatility becomes mere data, not a command. What you have constructed is not a shield. It is a null field. Chaos approaches its event horizon and finds no purchase, no reactive matter to consume. It meets only the gravitational pull of your deliberate focus and is redirected into the void. The unassailable calm you now benchmark is not the absence of pressure. It is the presence of a deeper physics. You have learned to distinguish the quantum noise of potential futures from the collapsed particle of the present moment. You command the observatory. You maintain the firewall. You execute the drills. The system is live. From this baseline, perception inverts. You no longer look out at a world demanding reaction. You observe inputs entering a sovereign domain. The noise of the age, the outrage, the allure, the artificial urgency, now registers only as a system diagnostic, confirming the integrity of your perimeter. This is the final transition from building resilience to emanating gravity. Your stability becomes the strongest signal in the room. It alters the behavior of systems around you. This is operational sovereignty. The work is not over. It has simply become the environment. The fracture is sealed. The siege is irrelevant. You are no longer a node in their network. You are the architect of your own. Now, go offline and execute.